calm app.
Just doing ASMR of. I had a friend who told me she can't listen to the podcast because it makes her fall asleep.
No, seriously, you have the most relaxing voice. Like, you're missing out by not selling yourself for like the Headspace or the Calm app.
But it's lovely to meet you.
Thank you.
Having only discovered you through Instagram.
Yeah, it's funny. You've followed me for quite some time now.
I have.
So I'm curious, what made you press the follow button? I'm putting it on you now.
Oh God, it's turned around. We'll spin this back briefly. I'll come back to this.
Okay.
Because I'm already recording. So welcome to the podcast, Maddie.
Hi.
I'm assuming you prefer to be called Maddie.
Oh yeah, Madeleine, as if I'm in trouble.
And I tried to figure out how to pronounce your last name and I couldn't.
Oh, Rhondeau.
Rhondeau, okay.
But Rhodes is easier. That's my married name.
Okay, so that makes sense. Because I was looking at it, I was like, I couldn't decide if I needed to put like a French inflection on it.
Yeah, you could. It might make me sound fancier.
Fancy. I mean, you're looking fancy. I'm seeing your studio at this point, and I'm seeing big paintings. I mean, you fancy compared to my desk of cack.
No, I love personally to look at people's studio spaces.
Yeah.
And sometimes the best work is the one that's right enmeshed in your house.
Yeah.
Where it's just a part of your everyday. I can't work like that because I get distracted by a million things, and so I have to have a designated space. But yeah, and also, by the way, let me know if you need me to like shut the window or like turn the fan off, like if the noise messes with it.
We should be fine. It sounds fine, and as I do a very under production on my productions because that way it's a lot more relaxed. So
awesome.
People enjoy it a little bit more. But welcome to the podcast, as I already said. For the people at home, can you tell them who you are and what you do?
Yeah. I'm Madeleine Rhondeau Rhodes, pronounce as you will. I am a painter, but also recently a collage artist. I started making collages really intensely right at the beginning of lockdown. So for the US, I guess that was like January, February. And I had never done collage before. Part of the reason for that was because I couldn't get into my studio space now because we're technically in a public building owned by the city of Charlottesville, which is where I work. And my studio mate is also 75, going on 76, I think, this year. And so she's very high risk. And so
you got to protect that.
Yeah, got to protect my old lady, as I like to call her. I'm her designated millennial.
Everyone needs one.
Yeah, everybody does, right? So yeah, I started doing collage right at the beginning, and I fell in love with it. And I hate drawing. Like, I am a terrible drawer. I can't sketch. I'm impatient. And so collage was kind of a interesting substitution for me to do preparatory work, where I wasn't having to spend a lot of time, trying to render something accurately. I could just pluck things as I wanted to. And, as someone who does surrealist kind of style work or Dadaesque style work, it kind of circles back to that tradition of surrealism and kind of automatic writing, and collage is so rooted in that kind of art historical dialogue with collage. And so it was just a really, really nice way to reinforce what I was already doing and make it better. So I think collage has been really useful for me as an artist in terms of getting better at composition and color placement. And I actually just yesterday finished a collage workshop with the University of Vermont's Fleming Museum, and this awesome husband team Rick Cassini-Cador. He runs the Collage Institute, which is like a big nonprofit that basically like connects collage communities together, and investigates kind of the history of collage, but also contemporary collage artists right now. And so, yeah, it was a really kind of validating experience to talk with other collage artists and get connected, because I think collage in some ways is like the misfits of the art world. Like, it kind of transcends a lot of different types of mediums, and yet people almost kind of do it in a vacuum too. I don't know.
It's such a strange one. I mean, I find it interesting that you say that you hate drawing, because, I mean, as you say, I've been following you for a long old while. I was trying to think of how I stumbled across you.
Yeah.
And
I'm trying to too.
It may be you are literally one of those randomly scrolling through Instagram, see a picture and think, oh, I like that, and then kind of following on from that, and then
serendipity.
Yeah, it's a real kind of like crumb of a situation where you see a little something, you think, and then occasionally it doesn't always work out. But with you, I say, I mean, I followed your work for a very long time. I say very long time. It makes it sound like decades, but it might have been. Who knows? Time is disappearing at this point.
Yeah, I know.
But your paintings, which I originally found you through your paintings, are very figurative. And there's a lot of in that which I would consider illustrative, and kind of connective, because personally I do a fair amount of illustration.
Right.
And I see a lot of those traits in that. So the fact that you kind of dislike drawing is kind of fascinating.
No, yeah, I can't stand it. I really, really, and actually the irony of that too is that I was just talking to a friend of mine in my studio last night. And she was like, yeah, how's the painting going? And I'm like, yeah, I'm going to be adding cartoons that I've drawn into the work. Mm-hmm. And she's like, what? And knowing that I don't like to draw. And also because my work is kind of dark, mm-hmm. and so it has kind of darker subtext. And so adding that component, I think is going to be a bit of a shock for people that have seen my work for a long time, or galleries that I work with that have, 2020 is a banner year for just, saying things. Whatever, let's just do it. There is no reason not to. But I think it will help inform kind of the way that I think, and help people to understand the way that I think. So, yeah, it'll be a challenge.
I mean, art's meant to be, isn't it? I find if you get a bit complacent with art, I always find I've got to make this harder for myself. Like, if this is too easy now, I need to adjust this and try something else. But then even we saying like you kind of works. What attracted me to your work initially is because it was dark, mm-hmm. because that's a lot of the artwork which I'm interested in and have been inspired by is dark artwork. The thing I said to you, it reminded me of Francis Bacon's paintings. And his figurative work and grotesques and all those kinds of things. But at the same time, I found with yours, I think because of the colors you choose, there's something quite playful about it. Mm-hmm. And so even though you're seeing something which is, from an aesthetic point of view, quite visceral, quite dark, the colors you choose, it's still there's still something fun there, still something quite angelic about it. And I'm like, that dragged me in.
I get on myself a lot about using the same colors over and over, and you can kind of see, I mean, people that are listening won't be able to see, but I use a lot of red and blue, which is it kills me every time I pick it up. I'm like, why am I doing this? I don't want to. I want to use another color. So I do love using kind of those candy colors, like the pink and the red and the blue, partly because it's one of those things where when you're making dark work, you can make dark work for dark's sake, right? Mm-hmm. But there's a part of me, I don't want the things that I'm kind of working through in my paintings to be gimmicky. I don't want my kind of stress or anxiety to be, part of this larger dialogue of like dark work, where it's just grotesque. Mm-hmm. And I think there has to be some level of accessibility to it too. A lot of times people will see my work before they meet me and they'll be like, you made that? Like as if, oh, how is this like very vanilla white girl, like with no tattoos and a very like white bread existence and upbringing, making work that is, you know, by all accounts, not happy, like over your couch art. But I think, you know, some of the best artists that make kind of darker narrative-based figurative work are just regular people that are exploring that side of themselves. And I, you know, we all go through this life with baggage, right? No one gets through this life unscathed. And, you know, it's not to say that I'm not a happy person, because I am. And, you know, it's not that my life hasn't been hard. It's not that my life hasn't been challenging, but I enjoy making this work because it's easier for me to contend with the things that upset me or bother me on a rectangle or a square or maybe a circle, you know, than it is to kind of talk about it out loud when I don't feel like it. So I think when I explain it that way to people, they get it. But initially there's that shock value of, oh my gosh, this girl has a heroin problem or like is a serial killer.
So specific. No, I think for kind of our past chats, that was something as well, which kind of very much I relate to, especially with how I've created work through kind of my life and times of, there is that whole weird idea of the work you make must be reflected in you as a person. You know, so you see a lot of people who do embody their artwork, and they're visual spectacles as much as their work is visual spectacle. And while they're very reserved, and the work they make is very reserved. And I remember growing up, going through school, and there being such a worry about the work which I was putting out, despite how my character is, and despite, you know, being fairly casual, light-hearted as a person, but the work I was putting out was very dark. I mean, I was in a gothy phase anyway. But
who wasn't?
Who came out of that? Nobody.
We're all emo goth kids at heart, right?
Yeah, everyone's a little damaged. So you kind of come out of that, and I recently had a comment for a friend of mine who seen some of my work and said, "Are you okay? You know, have you been okay?" And I said, "I'm perfectly fine because I've made work like this." If I stop making work like this, if you ever look at my work and you think this is no longer expressing something, or is just making it for the sake of making a product or that kind of thing, that's when you need to worry. That's when I've stopped processing everything which is going on, and I'm no longer outputting artwork which is relevant to me. So
I think there's a shared language among creatives, right? Where I think it's kind of understood that you don't necessarily have to be living the art that you're making. You know, like as I've gotten older, one of the things that has really struck me is the kind of scarcity mindset of artists, where, you know, you have to be the starving artist and making this just really like emotionally visceral work. And the struggle has to be there. And I don't necessarily think that's true. I think that you can be in a really positive place in your life, like partner or otherwise, you know, in a committed relationship or happily single, or, you know, working a full-time job and then doing art on the side, or deciding to commit entirely into your work. I don't think that there's any kind of archetype for an artist. You know what I mean? Like, I don't think there's any kind of just caricature of the like broken person, you know, and that, you know, that's kind of liberating in some ways, like that you can make work. It doesn't have to be a reflection of you. It can be something it can be exploratory. Like I like to explore the recesses of my brain that I find uncomfortable, you know. There's an artist named Sarah Slappy who is just this awesome artist. I think she's based in Brooklyn. And I did a virtual studio visit with her about 2 years ago, and we talked about the same thing. Like you know, we talked about how we're just these two normal ladies making art, you know, but with kind of dark imagery. But I struggle with sometimes the label of making dark art, even though in some ways I've fully embraced it, because it definitely limits some of my opportunities, like
Yeah.
with certain galleries, and also with certain collectors too. Like
Yeah.
all of the people that collect my work are definitely kind of interested in that darker work as a whole to put in their homes, which is great. There's always a market for that. But generally, I think the themes that I deal with are, and I can go into them too, because people that don't know me have no idea what I'm talking about. But
we're going to expose it all.
Yeah. So like I'm really interested in the idea of memory and how memory is this kind of ever-changing story in your head that, based on your gender, your age, your sexuality, it can be shaped by your experiences and who you are as a person. And so that there isn't necessarily one absolute truth to your memory, because your brain acts in a way to protect you from the things that are upsetting or things that were like really joyous. Like your brain colors the experience for you based on what's going on and who you are.
Yeah.
And so I've always really loved working from the imagery that's in my head. I'm not as interested in kind of like what's right in front of me, which is why collage is kind of a great way, because it's almost like you turn your brain off and it's just, you zone out, and then when you wake up, you've got an image, like you can just literally like pull things and like zone out and cut out tiny details. And then when you kind of stop and blink for a sec, you've got something that you didn't know existed before and is now just this perfect, complete image to work from.
Yeah.
And I think that, I'm hoping that like my collage work will kind of be a gateway to places that I haven't been able to access before with my paintings. Like I would like my career to not be just totally steeped in like this dark, I want the light CV, not the dark CV all the time. But who knows, right? Like this could be a phase. I mean,
this could be your goth phase number 2.
That's right. Yeah, it was like the relapse. Yeah. I think that it isn't, like that's just kind of who I am and how I analyze things. But it could be, who knows?
Very easily. I think a collage for me has always been a fairly interesting one. I never really explored it until I got to college. Like it wasn't really a thing. Prior to that, I was painting and illustrating, and then in college I got really into photography, and did my A-levels in photography, and that was kind of how I got more into it, because suddenly I was producing all these photographs, and I was like, suddenly I've got access to all this media which I never had before, and because of my age, back then the internet wasn't as amazing as it was, and you kind of get sucked into the thing. So it's quite interesting of seeing that kind of thing. There's quite a light technique, when I think most people experience it when they're in maybe their most volatile, when they're kind of going through changes and going through that. You start scrapbooking and you start throwing things together and accenting images because you want to express yourself and you want to do it quickly. And so, like you say, instantaneously, it gives you that instant relief, which you wouldn't necessarily get with a long-term painting.
Well, and it's so funny because with collage, it's almost kind of treated as like the little kid sister of the art world. Like if you look up definitions of collage on the internet, they'll give you a list of like assembling fragmented pieces of printed material. And then how they do like the little example sentence? Yeah. It was like, the teachers gave the children postcards to cut up in class. If you go to the painting section of the dictionary, it's like, the old masters painted from life. There's not the same kind of stature given to collage as there is to other mediums. And I think it's such a shame, because some of the best work is collage. And in a lot of ways, you can look at a lot of mediums through the lens of collage, like taking disparate things and imagery. And even the way our brain thinks is kind of collage based. Like we're picking and choosing and selecting. And mashing it all together.
You're montaging and then creating that into something
absolutely
which is another output. So to include it's like having a TV which you can just print. So you're remembering disparate parts of whatever show you watched, and then going, oh, well, suddenly now this is just part of. This is more of a vision. In a way, it may be more personal than creating something imaginary or something out of your mind.
Oh yeah.
To use collage.
Yeah, revisionist history in this sense is very useful.
Yeah,
makes for better images.
Makes it more impactful that way.
Sorry.
I mean, so it's essentially your works. We said in the email, classified it kind of surrealist, as the main stylistic theme, and including collage and through surrealism and that kind of thing. But I always find surrealism is quite an interesting thing, and the kind of the dark and light side of things, because like what you're saying with collage, gets a bit of a bad rap in terms of it gets associated with certain types of creation. I think surrealism gets very much that kind of same brush, but from the point of view that it can be seen as a bit cliche, because it's the thing which everyone knows about. Anyone who's not even in the artwork world knows about surrealism because of famous surrealists, and they're like, you draw weird things, you draw things that make things which don't make any sense. So combining the two gives it. But I mean, I always think his surrealism is quite light, and I don't know why.
Really, because I think it's the opposite. But maybe, I mean, that could be our own bias, like, and I think, surrealism as a whole, it is a broad brushstroke, right? But there's so many elements of it. So like, I try to employ kind of Dada qualities to my work, which, I'm really working from like a figurative based pictorial language, I guess you could say. But I try to incorporate kind of like weird abstract elements that act as like mechanisms almost to activate the space. So like, I try to create objects based on fragments of paper that I find, or magazines or newspapers, to kind of act as like timeless objects. Like, they don't have a timestamp. Like, I want them to look futuristic. So like the thing behind me, like with the cage and like the little bowl, like it looks very sci-fi, right? But what that really is two light fixtures from Restoration Hardware that I can't afford, like, like I want, but that is really essential to that, the narrative and the dialogue of the piece and the characters together, because it's two mechanisms that are either kind of, responding to the figure, or they're just sitting there, right? Like, maybe they're moving, maybe they're not. And in that way, like that kind of mobile quality that Dada has, I'm trying to employ to get my work to be more dynamic. Because I mean, you could look at surrealism and have the droopy clock and the tongues for eyes, all the classics, right?
All the classics, the greatest hits of surrealism.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. I really try to read a lot about what people have done in the past. I think that's one of the things that a lot of young artists don't do right now. And that, I think, is probably because we're bombarded by social media. Like, there's so much visual to take in. Everything seems like it's been new and like it's revolutionary, but it's been done before. Like, usually like 9.99 times out of 10, it's been done before. And so you're really just borrowing from an art history that's already been established, and so I find a lot of times, like when I do critiques with other artists, or they ask me to come look at their work, I'll say, well, have you looked at this person? And then they'll open the book and it's exactly the same thing they're doing, and they're like bummed that they didn't come up with it first. And I'm like, that's okay, you just have to adapt, and and just make sure you kind of reference it in your work if that's your intention.
It's such a strange one, I find, especially creating work, when you do find something which is your work. Especially you've been running for a while with an idea, you're like, yes, this is fantastic. It's exactly how I want it to look. It's coming out great. And then someone says, oh, this reminds me of this.
Yep.
And you look at
it,
and
it's ruined.
Crap.
And then you have to burn it.
I've never even seen this before. How did we get to that? I think I heard that a few years ago when someone mentioned the art movement of lowbrow to me,
Yeah.
and I'd never heard of it as a term. And then someone showed me, and actually, this makes so much more sense of why my work looks the way it does.
Yeah.
Because it's the style which all the musicians I was listening to as a teenager used.
Oh, that's really interesting.
And it's like I've internalized it and spit it back out and not even realized what I've done because I've not had the context to apply to it.
Right.
And you find, especially now, like you say, with young artists, a lot of it is aesthetic.
Yeah.
There's been so much more has been placed on the idea of aesthetic and what you can produce, which looks like something else.
Well, and I think a lot of that, it kind of goes back to that scarcity mindset, right? Like if you're trying to get into certain galleries and your peers are doing it successfully with the work they're making, you try to in some ways replicate that.
Yeah.
You know, like I talk to a lot of artists from New York who, you know, like that is like one of the meccas of art in the world. But in some ways it's a really small community. I think one of the benefits of not being in an environment like that is you're not necessarily getting that kind of you're not getting that same, you're not enmeshed in that community where a lot of people are competing for the same spaces. And so, you know, the galleries really dictate like what kind of art they want, you know, what kind of collectors they want. And only, you know, and I mean, I think this is going to change a lot in the next year. But, you know, there's only going to be certain galleries that survive. And the ones that do is going to dictate what kind of art really stays relevant for collectors. You know, so if you have mostly people doing conceptual work, and that's what's selling, you know, figurative painting, forget it. Like dark work, forget it. Who cares?
I mean, that's just reminded me of, so there's an artist called Grayson Perry in the UK.
Sounds so familiar.
Yeah, he's one of the kind of the main,
I'll write it down.
I'd say probably one of the more famous artists within the UK at the moment. And has done a lot of work which is surrounded about his identity and gender and masculinity and ripping that back, but also does a lot of writing about being an artist and how that kind of applies to a modern society and these kinds of things. But he recently made a comment which kind of upset the art world because he suggested that the pandemic would clear away the driftwood of the art world and that only certain artists would survive it, but it would get rid of the stuff which doesn't really matter. And I think it was just a really kind of interesting thing of just kind of looking at it from that point of view of if you're in this situation where things are suddenly harder and the competition is increased, you are in a situation where some artists will just stop making art.
It's funny you say that. I would say that 50% of the people I talk to have not made work, have not touched anything. The other 50% have just exploded, like prolific amount of work, you know, due to quarantining and things like that. I think, you know, that's also coming from the perspective of people that have the luxury of not having other obligations like children. Like I don't have kids. So, you know, I am responsible to one other person and then myself. And that makes it that much easier. Like there's not a lot of credit given to the artists who have the obligations of their family in trying to do this. And which there are so many women who are incredible artists that have kids. But, you know, with kids being, and I don't know how it is in the UK, but like kids being home, not at school, like that basically shuts down studio time. Like there's no, you don't have studio time when, you know, Johnny wants his crackers. So like, you don't get that. So, I mean, in some ways, you know, in a lot of ways, art is a luxury and art is very selfish. And I don't mean that in like a bad way, you know, but it's very self-focused.
Yeah.
So there are going to be people that do better right now because they're in a position to be more successful. But yeah, driftwood, that's harsh.
I know it was one of the, but in a way I mean, I'd said something similar about small businesses to a friend of mine, because
people that were just hanging on are not going to make it.
hanging on, or they were just doing it because, oh, I might do this, I might open this shop, or I might do that. It's like, well, the people who are really, really in it, they have a really unique idea which will actually survive and they can make ends meet, even if it's just survival level, they'll carry on. But the people who are just playing with the idea, not that I'm saying artists are playing with the idea, I don't want to get...
No, yeah, I know what you mean though.
But yeah, it was kind of that whole idea, and I'd thought of it from kind of like an economic point of view of, yeah, you'll lose a lot of businesses, but a lot of these businesses wouldn't survive if they started to struggle. But with artists, it's such a strange thing to think. And like you say, it's not really harsh to say that art isn't essential. I produced an illustration this year, which is just essentially saying that we weren't. Because in terms of survival, one-on-one, food, shelter, and that we're a luxury. We're a symptom of being human and needing to translate our thoughts, but we're not essential. You could survive without us; it just wouldn't be a very happy survival. And kind of getting down to that grips of it is such a strange thing to think of that now in 2020 as just a reality now.
Yeah, I think too, the people that will survive this well and come out better are the ones that will be more nimble in terms of their art practice and also their art business. And I think a lot of people that are looking for other avenues to show their work and art, married to the idea of having to show in these big white cube galleries are the ones that are going to be better for it, because I think with the less access to opportunity means that if you really care about getting your work out, and that might not be a goal for most people, but with me, like I'm not as concerned about the sale of the work as much as I am the dialogue that happens when someone steps in front of it. And so publications, I think, or self-publications are going to be huge. I think that is going to be whether that's virtual or in print, I think that's going to be the next phase for artists, is kind of bring back the zine, like printed books, artist books, getting people to curate your work and write about it. I think that's going to be one of the ways that a lot of artists, and particularly outsider artists that don't have access to or have that barrier to entry of like a formalized arts education can get involved, is by doing those kind of written and visual pieces. It kind of skips, you're like jumping the line to get to the front of the gallery, and you've already got something in your back pocket where you can show people what you're doing, and explain it to them in a way that's almost like a gallery card, right? Like next to your work, but it's in a book next to your work. I think people just have to be a little bit creative. Artists need to be creative about how...
That is a strange thing to say, but artists need to be creative, and so many...
Well, some artists are... I mean, like, all artists I know, or most of them, I should say all, most of them are terrible about managing that business side of their work.
Oh,
like,
definitely.
Terrible. It's why art advisors and art consultants are a thing, because they need someone to go in and say, this is what you need to do, and this is how you need to structure your time so that you have enough time to make work, and you're not down in the weeds about like your Instagram and, like reading over contracts and all of that, writing a press release. I think 2021 is going to be an interesting shakeout of who makes it and who doesn't. And it's going to be sad too, because there's a lot of great places that are hanging on that are great ideas, but they won't survive it.
I think it's interesting to think of it from a point of view of kind of more traditional versus non-traditional art routes. I mean, I assume you're more of a traditional art route in the sense of studied for it now, doing, is it a residency where you are?
Well, so no, this is my studio.
Okay.
Like this is my home base. I have a studio at home where I do all my collage and sun painting. But for me, I need a place where I can go to get work done. Actually, so where I am is the McGuffey Art Center in Charlottesville, Virginia. It's one of the oldest artist cooperatives in the United States.
I will be honest, I had to Google Charlottesville.
That's okay. I'm sure a lot of things came up about Charlottesville, and then you were like, "Oh, I know what Charlottesville is."
I only knew one thing about Charlottesville, and it was a very negative thing. And I was like, I need to know more about this place.
Yeah, yeah. No, yeah. There's a lot more to us, I think. But yeah, I'm one of the youngest people in this building. It was, some of the same founders of the Artist Cooperative are still members here.
Oh, wow.
But yeah, it used to be an old all-girls school building. And so I'm in one of the classrooms.
Having a whole classroom to yourself.
That's right. I have a whole classroom to myself. Actually, I'm looking at one of the old blackboards that they had. So it was built in 1913, I think.
1913.
Yeah.
Nice.
I'm almost positive.
I always get reminded, especially when I have American guests.
It's not old.
Yeah. It's that kind of thing of what your country considers old. I'm suddenly going,
it's so true.
Yeah.
I went to Japan a few years ago.
Oh yeah.
And my husband and I walked up to one of these temples, and it was like 2,000 years old. Yeah. And I'm thinking, oh my God, and it's wood. It's made out of wood. I'm thinking, like, we do not hold a candle. It's, it's why other countries roll their eyes.
You just kind of take it. I think, I can't remember, I was talking to a couple of friends of mine who live in California.
Mm-hmm.
And they were on about some buildings they had over there and all these different things. And I took them into Google Street View of Lincoln, where I'm from.
Yeah.
And they were like, "Oh, what's that on the hill?" And I was like, "Oh, that's the cathedral. It was made in like 1072." Like, it's that level of old where I'm just like, yeah, it's just that. We don't even think about how old it is.
It's amazing, though.
Yeah. It's history tracked.
I think, I studied architecture in college. I studied historic preservation. And so I got another degree in studio art.
How many degrees?
But it was almost secondary to the historic preservation.
How many degrees do you have?
So I did a double major. I don't know how it works in the UK, but you can do like double majors.
I mean,
or like study two things at the same time.
Okay.
And then I also did 2 other little studies in museum studies and urban studies. So what people are going to get from this is that I'm a huge nerd. And I'm really type A.
I mean, I didn't want to point it out.
Yeah, well, I think it was pretty obvious from the beginning.
Pretty obvious. I mean, I barely got my degree. So.
Well, I am somebody that's like, I don't half-ass things.
Yeah. I mean, if you're studying architecture and everything, you started in quite a non-expressive format, I would say, with architecture.
Oh, God.
That's function over form, right?
Well, but I instead took the major in a totally different direction. So I was the person that said, don't save all 20 of the 19th century barns. Let's turn them into recording studios instead and save one as the example. Okay. And I was like, crucifying the program.
So you just
people were shocked. There was a shockwave through the entirety of I studied in particular adaptive reuse. So I was really interested in taking structures, maintaining the important elements of what made it a historic structure, but modernizing it so that we can continue to use it. Because most general people, aside from historic preservation nerds, don't care about the 19th century barn. No. What they do care is that they can put their Pinterest wedding in the 19th century barn. Right.
That's a really
and
good
you still
point.
Save it. Yeah. Right. And so, it becomes a small business, and it is still a part of the fabric of our culture, right? But it's being utilized in a completely different way. You probably can't do that to the cathedral.
Well, it's just an interesting point. So there's a gallery in Lincoln called the Usher Gallery, which is one of the more historic buildings. I'll do a quick Google as I explain what it is, which was essentially donated to Lincoln, the city, by Usher, and it's currently under debate of what the use of it is, because it houses a collection of art, which was also donated to the city. So the building and the collection were donated, and then recently the council decided 1927 it was built, so it's not that old. but they recently decided they're going to close part of the gallery so they can put things like weddings
Right.
inside of this gallery. And there's been so much uproar within the city that they're removing this artwork in order to accommodate weddings, even though some of the artwork's staying and it's going on display in different places.
Is the art good?
No. I
That
mean,
makes it
that's my
better. That
personal
makes it
view.
so much better.
I look around the collection and I'm like, I don't really care about any of this art. The only bits I care about is there's some really nice marble statues,
Okay.
and I'm like, yeah, these are really nice. A little confused, but most of them are mythological. And I'm like, yeah, there's some interesting things, but the rest of it, just I don't care about. But there's so much uproar. We're trying to repurpose this building, even though it's
Yeah.
not really used. The collection's not that well visited. Nobody really cares about it. But the moment you try to go, no, I want to
Yeah.
use this for something else, suddenly the crowds just come out of nowhere.
It's the peanut gallery.
Just wrecking through.
Yeah. Yeah, it's funny. As soon as you say we're going to take something away,
Yeah.
people start to lose their minds. But
Yeah.
yeah, in some ways I found that to be a really nice creative outlet. But when I left college, I just craved making art. Like I was working other jobs and doing other things that weren't art related, but I was still always continuing to make art. And then about 1.5 years ago, I committed to do art full time, and just left it all behind.
Just abandoned.
Well, I mean, I shouldn't say that. Like I have the privilege of my husband is, working, right. So I'm not going to be homeless. But
I mean, there's that, yeah.
Yeah, but honestly, like thinking about it, there's only one or two artists that I know, one of whom has shown at the Whitney in New York, and the other one who lives here locally, that can be fully self-sufficient off of art. Where they're not working 2 jobs or 1 full-time job or have a partner that's supporting them.
Yeah.
And I think, it kind of comes back to that redefinition of what it means to be an artist. Like there's different paths that different people take. And it doesn't mean that any one is better than the other. It just is different. So
just different strokes.
Yeah.
It takes the world.
Different folks.
I mean, you chose a genre coming out of architecture then, which is, I'd say, fairly far removed from architecture in attempting surrealism and abstract images and forms. Though there is an accessibility to surrealism, which is what attracts me to it. Is the visual connection gets you first, and then you look more into it. But I mean, as you kind of mentioned in the email, as a female artist within surrealism, you've got quite a bridge to build and quite a mountain to climb, it would seem.
Yeah, I mean, I think when you look back into art history and surrealism and visually, like what it was doing and who was really running the ship, the way that the female form in surrealism was depicted was really, in some ways, either over-glorified or really, really negative. And, you would get like grotesque, like female body parts, but then you would also have women almost depicted as like the gatekeepers of innocence and like this naivete and, they're empaths, they're so emotionally attuned, but it almost kind of trapped women in this like immature state where they didn't have it. It was almost like depicting women as not having substance. They were just the ones that everything was positive and light.
Yeah.
When the reality is that, women are just as capable and sometimes more capable of tougher circumstances and traumatic experiences and carrying a lot of the burdens of the fallout of our society. And, I'm not necessarily interested as an artist in depicting women in that way because I don't think that's realistic. I think, so people that are listening can't see what I'm doing, but you can see it. So like, I'm not necessarily interested in depicting women as pretty or like attractive. That's not necessarily my MO. I want people to know that they're women. Or people that identify as women. But I am not interested in this kind of idealized figure. And I think that it's interesting to me that I'm part now of this tradition of surrealism, but also being aware of the fact that I'm adding to a narrative that has historically kind of underrepresented me in a marginalized way.
Yeah.
And so I like that kind of, well, I'm going to tell you.
Yeah.
And it's not to say that I'm the only one doing that, because there's tons of female, I mean, I can think of like 2 British artists that are surrealists, like Lise Stoufflet, I think is her name, Stoufflet. She shows at Hoffa Gallery, and then Lucille Gauvain.
Oh, I've heard of that. That rings a bell.
Yeah, they're both surrealist artists, and I think the pandemic is going to breed a lot of surrealism, because it's also a form of escapism. People don't want to have to deal with the things that are hard and challenging. They want somewhere that they can just not have to worry about. I mean, particularly in the United States right now. Like there's I can't imagine what it's like for Canada, but I'm sure it's like living above a meth lab. So
that's how Scotland feels about the England.
Yeah, I mean, it's like it's really rough right now. It doesn't matter where you fall out politically. Like it's a challenge for everyone. I mean, I think that surrealism for me has always been somewhere that I can create my own rules and live in a world that I like. I'm an artist who has OCD. It's something I was recently diagnosed with, but I kind of always knew it was there. And collage, to bring it back to collage, was so useful for me in terms of just occupying my hands and not having to think about like intrusive thoughts. Like it really just kept me centered on what I was doing, but it was also feeding into something really positive.
Yeah.
And I think that's what you want, right? Like you want something that can kind of take the best of what you're struggling with and apply it in a way that's useful, because there's so many downsides, right? But that's not necessarily the way to look at it. Like you've got to think of it in a way that can inform and highlight the things that makes your brain great, the creative side. But yeah, it's been a challenge. I think that it's going to be interesting to look at art from this time, because it will forever be time stamped as pandemic art. Like it will forever be integrated into the fabric. Even if people are making geometric abstracts, you're not going to be able to take away from the fact that it was made during the era of COVID.
I got thinking about that the other day, of anything you see, because the thought I got thinking of was the amount of sitcoms and TV shows and stuff we see coming out. I feel like 2020, unless the plot surrounds the idea of the pandemic and is necessary, I feel like 2020 will be just a removed year from media.
The lost year.
Nobody's going to base a film in 2020 because everybody's aware of what happened. So you would watch it and be like, oh, well, no, this is 20.
Unless we get like a 28 days later,
it's
like
kind of removed.
COVID style. Yeah, no,
with art, you're going to see 2020 underneath a painting.
Yeah.
And you'd be like, oh.
They were having an emotional breakdown alone.
Where were they? What was the lockdown rules in this place at that time, so I can know more about this painting? Yeah, no, it's really interesting when it becomes contextualized like that, because there's no way that it doesn't permeate your work. Like it does. Whether you're avoiding it or whether you're facing it head on, like it's there. Yeah. And no one has come out of this without being impacted by it. There's been such a trickle down into the way that we live, and it's shown some of the really bad systemic kind of inconsistencies and just failures for everyone involved, where like what happens when the globe just shuts down. People feel it. It also illuminates the fact that people need creativity. Like art is a luxury, but like I need art to live. Like it fuels me, and it keeps me sane. And I think collage is one of those things where like it's a low cost to entry and it's accessible. Everyone can pick up paper and scissors, and just make things. And
I would hazard a guess that a lot of people did that, during this time. Like they just needed something to do.
I think there was
Yeah.
a strong feeling of prior to 2020, especially between smaller artists, where you kind of get into this habit of, I'll try doing something and I'll try doing something new, and then a month later you're trying to think of how you can modify it, how you can sell it, and how you can produce something to sell. And I think 2020 in a way acted as a huge reminder for everybody that actually art is a coping mechanism. For the majority of artists, no artist starts, or no good artist, I would say, from my opinion, starts by going, I want to make a product. I want to make something to sell. You start as I just found that I'm drawing today, or I'm sculpting today, and then down the line you modify that into something else. Whereas 2020, everyone just kind of picked up and went, maybe I can try this and I can try that, and like you say with collage, it being quite an accessible thing, quite an available thing. I imagine there's a lot of people have tried it this year.
Well, and I think it's so there's something about getting off your computer and doing something very tactile too. Like touch for me is a big thing, like being able to like work with the medium. And yeah, I think too, like collage is one of those things where you can kind of work in a vacuum and be like, oh my gosh, there's other people doing this. Like I'm not alone, I think it's really what being home during this last year has done is it's like you said, it's kind of reacquainted artists with, or that 50% that's making a ton of work, I guess, that it's something that they do to also self-soothe too. Like it's a therapeutic kind of cathartic thing for a lot of people. And, it's provided a lot of time for like freedom and no limitations on what you can do, because galleries were shutting down, shows were canceling. I get caught up a lot of times in making work for shows, and I forget that I'm what I was doing originally, and I think it's really important to always kind of circle back and center yourself. And I did this because I love this, and I need this in my life, and this is what I'm interested in doing, not so much, kind of what we were talking about, where, you get into this kind of community group think of, well, I need to make work like this because that's what they want. And, I don't want to be homeless.
I mean, that is a goal in life, is generally to just avoid being homeless. If you're going to have a goal.
Right.
Not a bad place to aim
it's top
for.
5.
Yeah. I think it's kind of interesting to see watch your work evolve as well, because I obviously haven't been following you for a while. And when I decided to kind of reach out this year to artists, and in a way, I'm like, the podcast has evolved this year because it had to. It forced me to get involved in learning how to do kind of virtual setups and things like that. But it gave me the opportunity to talk to people in other countries and kind of pick up and suggest to guests that they might want to talk about things and get out, which is I always do find interesting when I meet artists, of the amount of artists who don't feel like they can talk about their work or express their work outside of their work, which is really interesting.
I think, it kind of comes down to what your goals and intentions are as an artist. If you're just making art for yourself that's meant to live in your house and not be public, that's fine. You don't have to explain yourself. But I think, if you're an artist that wants to make work to be in a gallery or in a coffee shop, wherever, you should be able to at least give a preliminary summary of what your work is about. Because if once the work is out in the world, it's not private anymore, it's public. Like it's available for public consumption. And all of the things that come with having people, randos come up to your work and correctly or incorrectly tell you what your work is about, right? And it's almost your responsibility in that sense to be able to advocate for your own work.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm probably pulling like a Grayson Perry right now and pissing off a bunch of people, but
That's
I
a
just
responsibility as artists, though, right?
I think you have to have a voice, you know, like, and to assume that other people aren't going to get you is kind of arrogant.
Yeah.
Like, you know, everybody, like, so people are above not being able to understand.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm getting like very heated. I need to temper it down. Right? Yeah, I guess that's true.
No, I mean, I completely agree. To me, if you're taking the time to produce art and you want to put it out into the world, there's a whole conversation could be had about the idea of once you release art, it actually no longer belongs to you because it's now part of public consumption. So at what point do you remove the artist from the artwork when, you know, down the line, the artist may go off and do something you disagree with? Does that affect the artwork they produced at one time versus further down the line? So I think being able to explain the work you do is at times the harder part of being an artist, but the more important part of being an artist.
Yeah, I think there's, you know, again, I think there's a lot of assumption that the one part of being an artist is just the purely visual, right? And I think it's so critical to be able to read about work, write about work. You know, I think about my art as a job. Like I think about I'm doing my due diligence by reading as much as I can, meeting as many people who are better than me as I can. And that being said, like I should preface that if you're a shy person, you know, I am not shy. Like I am not, I consider myself a combination of an extrovert and introvert, but I am not a shy person. No. You know, being able to talk about your work and having a public speaking, you know, fear is different, right? But to be able to just at least articulate a few things about your work that someone else can kind of wrestle with or try to interpret is important because otherwise, you know, keep it at your house. Like to say I'm going to make this work, but then no one's going to be able to understand it, it is a little unfair. And
it lashes onto that accessibility aspect again of I think this if I have a main gripe with kind of fine art worlds, it's worlds of fine art where people are kind of gatekeeping media and gatekeeping work by saying, oh well, we're not going to explain it, or we're not going to put in anything which the public can relate to, because you need to have a degree to understand it, or you need to have read this book or that book. And to me, if you're creating successful artwork, you need to have at least one aspect, even if it's minute, even if it's just something where they can look at it and say, oh, I get that one bit of reference, and then that might interest them to explore the rest of it. And you need to have that. And when it comes to being able to explain it, it's part of that accessibility aspect. It's I can explain one line to it, which will help you understand it, and then if you want to know more, you'll know more. But otherwise, it might not be for you.
I think there's a lot of hubris in that way sometimes in the art world of people who are talking about their work but aren't willing to share. And I in some ways I can also sympathize with that because my work is really personal. Like it's very intensely intimate and personal. And so, you know, I look back at some of the work I made 2 and 3 years ago and I feel it's cowardly because I was hiding behind the thing that I didn't want to happen, which was making it gimmicky. Right. And, you know, I'm finally kind of starting now to work on addressing some of the things that are part of my work, like trauma and mental health and, you know, kind of the female experience and things like that, or the feminine experience. And you know, I think too, like you don't necessarily have to go into the nitty gritty of your life, but I think you need to give at least the conceptual framework for people to be able to relate to it. Like people can't necessarily relate to this. Yeah. I'm motioning for people that can't see. But they will be able to relate to getting lost in their own thoughts and, you know, kind of the imagination of the brain and protecting you from the things that you're upset about, or trying to find an escape, or creating a world where you don't have to worry about societally condoned, definitions of identity, or, institutions that don't serve you as an individual. So I think that is something that, I'm a work in progress, but I'm getting better about being willing to talk about those things too. Yeah. I think just at least giving it your best college try is important. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Oof, sorry, my leg is just falling asleep on me. The problems of being tall and
Shake
being
it
sat
out.
down.
How tall are you?
I'm 6'2".
Okay, so you're like kind of tall.
Yeah, I'm tall, taller than average, but not actually considered fully tall.
Yeah, I would say that for most of the general population, you're really tall, but my family happens to be super, super tall.
How tall are you?
That's the funny thing. I'm very short. So I'm not technically very short. I'm like 5'6.5".
All right.
My mom's taller than me. I have one brother who's 6'6", the other one's 6'5", and then my dad's like 6'5". So
we're all family.
It's a tall family, yeah. Except for me, we don't know what happened.
They used up all the tall in all the other family.
Well, no, I'm the oldest, so you would have thought I would have been like the tall, creepy, lanky one, but I'm not.
I like the idea that maybe a family had you and thought, okay, so this one grows to this size. We can have more. We can afford the space. And then suddenly got taller and taller additions.
Yeah. They just kept improving.
It's the beta test, but then on and on and on. I mean, are you the only artist in your family, or is this a trait which is carried through?
So I have a grandmother who painted. She doesn't anymore, but she was a good, talented oil painter. Mm-hmm. I use acrylics. I can't stand oil painting. Yeah. And then I have a brother who is a musician, and he plays the mandolin, but he's also a professional piano tuner. So, I mean, I think, my husband is actually very creative. He is a musician, and he is working on, he's a duo. So his band partner is his best friend. And so they're working on original music right now. But they've done remixes for popular artists in the US and things like that. So yeah, so it's like collective brain of creativity in our house.
Yeah. It sounds like it. It sounds like you're surrounded by that kind of mood.
I don't think I could be, I would have a really hard time being with someone who wasn't creative. Now, that being said, I've spoken to many of my friends who have dated people that work in the same medium.
Right.
And that is a challenge because I find that it gets very kind of competitive.
I always liked the idea of meeting and marrying like an accountant, just someone, also like a lawyer, just someone who's so far removed from everything that I am, just to kind of provide me with that root cause of, oh yeah, not everyone's me. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and also financial stability.
I mean, that'd be great.
Yeah.
If I didn't have to work and I could be fully supported, why wouldn't I do that?
Yeah, it is. I think it's very good to have someone who isn't necessarily visual, like a visual creative, to bounce things off of.
Yeah.
Because it's just totally different mode of operations, right? They're thinking of it from an entirely different standpoint than you are. And so there's, I think, a lot that can be lost in translation if you don't, not like a lay person, but like just someone who isn't around your work all the time and like totally enmeshed in the process of like their own work that relates to yours. I think it's really useful to get that kind of feedback from people. If you want it. If you don't want it, then don't bother.
If you don't want it, don't ask.
Yeah, that's generally how I work. Like so where McGuffey, when it's open, it's not open normally, is a public building. And so having the studio space is great, but one of the things that can be interesting is you get like random people from the community that walk in and they can do that. Yeah. And I like talking to people, so it's not a big deal. But they'll just start giving you advice. It's like this little family from Arkansas has come in and they're telling you, oh, honey, that's not, that's a little scary. Are you okay?
I love that idea. They're just kind of fully ingrained of like, yeah, I'm really going to
And
go.
a lot of times, like when I had a male studio mate, a guy who worked right next to me, he did these kind of like small, very pastel, very soft, really pretty, really, really pretty watercolor paintings. And then you have me, right? And they always assumed that I did the watercolor paintings, which I find really interesting. I get that a lot. Like a lot of people, and I don't think as much right now, but before used to think I was a guy. But if they didn't see my name attached to it and they didn't see me, which I found really fascinating because I didn't think that my work read as like male or female. I think it definitely reads as female now.
That's really interesting.
I don't know. Yeah, it was really, really fascinating because I got it more than once.
Yeah,
like throughout the years.
I had a thought about this when I was looking for guests, and in fact, when I was kind of considering contacting yourself, when I was looking through guests, and I started, the easiest place to start is look through Instagram and find some people you think would be interested too.
Yeah.
And because I follow the same types of artwork, which obviously interests me, so there's a lot of similar, surreal, kind of dark work, and I kept looking them up, and then finding out who these people were. And finding that they were all women.
Yeah.
And I was, I'd never even thought to look past the painting and discovering it's like, oh, there's a lot of women here in this genre. And also I'm following them all. So is it going to be weird if I suddenly contact them all? And I
don't think so.
A long list of women. I'm like, this seems weird for me. Why is that?
No, but I think it's, you've struck on something that I think, is really important, which is that these women are working in a medium that doesn't necessarily have rules. There's no rules to what you can do. And I mean, I look at surrealism from a lot of the perspective of like a lot of outsider artists who are making work in the vein of surrealism. Like the first person that comes to mind is like Eugene von Bruckenheim. I'm probably butchering his name. But he was an artist from Milwaukee that is incredible. And, like no rules, was making this amazing work. He's a man, so it doesn't really count in terms of this argument. But like, when you think about a women's place in art and art history, surrealism is kind of this interesting place to land where you can create a world of your own design that is not, doesn't have to be informed by anything, that has come from like this formalized art kind of institution. It can be whatever you want it to be. And in that way, like you're creating a world that works for you and is also something you can play in and explore in, like there's a freedom in that I don't think, a lot of times women in this life get to have. So, and a lot of other marginalized communities don't get to have. That have been historically underrepresented in the art world. So surrealism is kind of this awesome place that you can live in.
This extra escape from everything else.
Yeah.
I think that's a great point to round this out on.
All right.
The embracing of surrealism and escaping everything else is going on. I mean, 2021 is going to be an interesting year as it comes
I have hope for it, though. I really do. I think, fingers crossed for a vaccine.
Yeah.
But I think what it's shown people too is that you can get through hard stuff.
Yeah.
You can find ways to cope. Healthy ways to cope. And you can find ways to slog through the things that are challenging. And, and art can be that thing for you, whether you've had an opportunity to do it or to not do it before.
I think that's a very good message. Well, thank you for coming to talk to me, Maddie.
Yeah, of course.
Lovely to speak to you today. I hope the rest of your day goes well. I'm thinking it's like 11 o'clock where you are.
It's 11:05. Well, that was good.
There you go. We're working with different people
Accurate.
and time zones. I know. But thank you for coming to talk to me. And we will talk to these guys later.